Hey Shadish, Jitu Natarakan, all my relatives, good morning or good afternoon. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Monte Yellowbird. I'm a Rikara Hiradza from the three affiliated tribes, and I am an established entrepreneur and artist and historian. So, what we want to talk about today is we want to introduce the concepts and the ideals of ledger art. Ledger art is a form of artistic but historic expression that was prominent back in the 1800s all the way into the present. There's been several different resurgence of this area and this era with contemporary artists as well as historic artists, very well known historic artists. And so what ledger art really was categorized, or is really the name really derives from, is from the ideal of it coming from ledger paper. How this really derived in that time frame was when Europeans had come to the United States, well, come to the country of ours, and start moving western to the western areas, to the western tribes, and meeting other tribes, and they're bringing goods as well. Some of the goods included pots and pans and beadwork and so on. And oddly enough, paper was another commodity that was kind of revered at a sense because of its ability to be able to artistically design images. And during that time frame, part of it was the ideal of change. It was two cultures coming together, and with the two cultures coming together, not everything worked out as well as it could or should have. But indigenous populations that were encountering Europeans moving west with the ideal of manifest destiny and Western expansion is that some of these items became trade items as well as spoils of war. And so with the government being established and moving indigenous populations from their land source, there was a movement to destroy the food source of indigenous populations by killing their buffalo and wiping out their buffalo so that it would be easier for them to be controlled and move to what they call reservations. And along with that came the ideal of using or being resourceful to whatever resources that were available at the time, because the buffalo were being wiped out. Part of that resource became paper. Now the paper itself was manufactured and made from Europeans. And it was a writing surface. Some of it had lines on it, some of them had words on it, but the paper actually came from the trees. And so it was a natural fiber, so to speak, but it had a communication on it as well. And so there are several different thoughts of how ledger art really began, but this is my version and from my historic background as well. But the use of paper really became not only a commodity, but it was more of a way to express who they were as a people. And during this time of the development of reservations and so on, that communities were changing, or tribes were changing. And so a lot of these expressions were done on an individual basis. And so warriors were the ones that were actually doing this kind of work. And so this was the northern and southern plains tribes. And so them, in a spiritual sense, understanding that these markings, or even our voice or the sound, or our actions, there's a spirit attached to it. And so being able to see that this is coming from, I guess what we'd call invading peoples to their lands, that what they wanted to do is they wanted to neutralize that communication on this paper. And so what they were doing, in a sense, were really neutralizing that communication by putting their great feats right on top of that paper. And so battle, courtship, ceremony, these were very important parts of their lifestyle. Hunting was also another one that they did. They wanted to leave something behind or tell the kind of person that they were by creating a spirit right on top of the paper itself. These papers right here are from the turn of the century from the Department of Interior. And I have other papers that are, of course, quite a bit older than that. But they were actually designed to communicate to masses without making a sound, just the writing. And so a lot of the things that we're doing when we're drawing or we're writing contracts or signing contracts is we're actually communicating, we're solidifying a communication to the masses. And so with ledger art, that's exactly what the warriors were doing, is that they were also taking the time to be able to work on who they were as a people. And they drew a lot of designs that were really telling stories about who they were. This particular one is called Watch the Birdie. Of course, it's a contemporary piece. It's done on a paper from the turn of the century from Colorado. And the piece really is about change. It's about things that are happening that are going to leave behind something for future or other generations. And of course, during that time frame, from the late 1800s, there was photographers that came from the East that came and they photographed indigenous people in their, of course, their natural regalia, and just because it was different. It was really different, and they wanted to capture a little bit of the past that would be remembered to the future generations. In this particular piece here, that we have a man that is taking a picture of this young couple. And the ideal of the young couple itself is really to start thinking about bringing our past to our present and, of course, to the future. And, of course, procreation, the ideal of having children and families and so on and so forth, and for the male and female. But them dressed in their full regalia to bring our traditions as well. And so while this man is taking this picture, there was a phrase back in the late 30s and around the 40s called Watch the Birdie. And what that was it was actually telling the subject to look in a focal area, look in a small area so that they could be photographed. And of course they do that a lot when you go to like Sears and you take your children, your grandchildren, or whoever you take them, and they have this little squeaky toy and they look in that area and then they take the picture. So the idea of the word Watch the Birdie, and back in the 40s they really did have a little birdie that they squeezed and made a sound. But it gave them a focal point. And so what's happening is that they're looking at this focal point, which is their finger, with the photographer's finger, and this little bird appears. Now this little bird appears, and of course, the way I have it designed is that it really has a spiritual sense to it. And so when I speak on behalf of our Creator, for instance, and I know that we use all kinds of different words to describe our Creator, but for the fact of this particular piece, to generalize pretty much is I'll speak on behalf of the Creator. The little bird is our Creator. And so this little bird flies in and lands right in that focal point, and that's our Creator witnessing this change that's happening to indigenous populations and peoples and their way of thinking and their ceremony, etc. The little bird is a yellow bird. And I use color representation to really tell a story. And yellow means enlightenment. And so it's just the ideal of this little bird enlightening us to the fact that Creator is watching all that we do, wherever we are. And so the other part too is, along with it, you'll see there's two chiefs that are sitting down. Now there's a young chief that's leaning over, and he's asking the older chief questions. And so what he's doing is he's asking the questions what a lot of young men should be doing at this time, and young women as well at this time. We should be asking our mothers and our grandmothers and our uncles and our grandpas and grandmas, how do I become a better person? How do I be a better citizen, a better student? How do I be a better leader? And so that's what this young man is doing. He's asking the older chief, how do I become a better leader, a better father, a better person? And so meanwhile, the older chief is looking, and he's watching this whole event transform right before his very eyes. And part of it is him seeing change happening. And the ideal of change happening right before his very eyes, before it's time for him to go home, or before he passes on. And so it's a historic event. It's something that maybe he never thought would happen, or maybe he knew it would happen. Now, in the bottom left hand, you'll see two little puppies. Again, yellow meaning enlightenment. These two little puppies are actually representative of two beings. Now, these two beings are part of our society today, part of who we are today, all people. But in one of our stories, traditional stories, they talk about these two beings that were following the people. The Rikara, they say we came from the darkness, from the earth, and our mother corn was the one that brought us out with the help of certain animals. And when she brought us out to the light, and she took us to where we would eventually end up and spend the rest of our days. And we followed Mother Corn, and we cared for her, we loved her, and we adored her, and we asked her for things. And as we were walking along with Mother Corn, there was two things that were following the people. And so the people had noticed that these two things were following. And pretty soon they start to get afraid. They got afraid, and pretty soon they ran to where Mother Corn is, and they grabbed onto her dress, and they said, "Mother," they said, "we're afraid." They said, "These two things are following us. We don't know what they are." And so Mother Corn, she gathered all the people, and she made them sit down. She said, "My children," she said, "you sit here." She said, "I'm going to go and visit these two things that are following you." So the people, they went and sat down. Soon she went over there, and she went to go visit those two beings. She was over there for a while. Then all of a sudden she came back. She said, "My children," she said, "come and sit around me," she said. I went over and I spoke to those two beings, those things that were following you. I spoke to them. And these two things are going to be in your life forever. In the springtime, when the rains and the thunder and life comes back to this earth, you should go out there and get to know them and feed them, talk to them. Ask them for pity for yourself and for your family and your relatives and your people. You should make offerings to them, corn and beans and squash and buffalo meat. Take it to that first being and ask for that pity. The first one is sickness. After you get to know it, and that's part of our life. The next one, you take that same offerings to that second one. You tell them, ask for pity. The second one is death. These things are part of our lives today, no matter what tribe we are, where we come from. But it helps us to understand that it's also a part of life. And so the teaching itself is really about change, but it's also about dealing with things that we fear. And so the figurative drawings of course, normally were done by men. And part of that reason is because men, we can only imitate life. And where females, they're gifted. They're above us. And they have the gift of life. These designs that go around there are from parfleche designs. It's parfleche designs. It really means to paint on flesh. And they're more geometrical, and some of them may be floral or abstract. But the ideal is that they're putting balance to our lives. And so that's why the piece is the way it is, and that's how it's designed. So what we're gonna, in the classroom, what I'm gonna ask you to do is to be able to use a counting paper and have your students or your participants take some time to use the accounting paper. And of course the ideal of counting has its benefits too, because we're being accountable for the things that we put on our paper. And so all we have to remember too is that when we make that mark of those words or those things that we do, that we're making a commitment and we're transforming right before our very eyes. So on the one side, what we want to do is we want to make a list of all the things that are really important to us in our lives. Kind of a self-evaluation of who we are. And it helps us because if we tell the truth, we're telling the truth to ourselves. If we're not telling the truth, we're only fooling ourselves. So all the list of the things that we value. And it gives us an ideal of who we are right at the present time. Now on the far right side, way on the end, I want you to make a number on how much you think it's worth. And so the number should be between 100 and 1. Some of them can have the same amount. But how they value in your life, all the way down. And it's important, I think, to put a time limit on it as well. But also take some time to just stop your participants and then go around and ask them some of their lists. And the other thing is we need to be able to talk about those things and explain to our peers and to our participants and so on why we've made those lists. And it's not wrong, it just means that this is who we are at the time. Doesn't mean we can't change. It's just who we are right now. And so after that's done, then it gives us an opportunity to get to know each other on a more personal basis. But it also gives us a chance to look at those things and know that we can get another paper and we could make changes in those things that we value. Because some of them might be education, some of them might be family, something, there might be all kinds of things, One of the other things I want you to consider too is that when we start doing these lists on the sides, in the middle, what I want you to like to do is I want you to start thinking about a very important event or something that makes you proud. But you want to be able to visualize as well as illustrate a very important thing. That's who you are. And it takes all these little things, positive things, to get us to a higher level of understanding as well as get us to accomplish bigger things that are positive in our lives. This particular piece is called Making Bear Medicine. And this particular piece right here is done on the paper from the turn of the century. But the piece has the designs, the parfleche designs, and of course the warrior's riding up with his spear. And the spear in my work, it represents truth. The blue around it represents, blue, it means sacredness. And so what this really means here is that when we decide to make choices in our lives that are very positive or something that's going to benefit our future, sometimes it's very difficult, but we do it because it's the right thing to do. It may be not comfortable for other people around us, but we have to think about ourselves and what's going to benefit us, because if we better ourselves, then we also surround ourselves with people that have that same like mind, the same positive energy. Sometimes the other friends are not, they don't want to change. But that's okay. You just have to move forward. Now, as this piece goes on, you'll see the small here. A small piece is, there's a little bear here, and this is more pictographic from the 1800s. And so the bear actually has a duality in the ideal of what it is. Because if you think of a bear is very fierce, very powerful, and we can fear it. But there's a way to make medicine out of our fears. And this is really what it's about. It's facing our fears, facing those things that we don't want to do because we're afraid to fail. Or we're afraid that somebody's not going to like us because we did something like that. It doesn't matter what other people think. What it really matters is that the steps that we're taking to get better in our lives. So this warrior here is I guess what they would call a dispatching car. He's facing his enemy, or the thing he fears. And this actually is a part of what I went through. I won't get into too much detail of what it was, but the ideal is facing that fear. And I faced it head on. I faced it with a lot of devotion to what I believe, and surrounded myself with people with not only like mind, but they were experts in their area. And I conquered it because it was important for me. And it made me a better person, made me a better man, it made me a better teacher, better artist. And so that's, like I say, when we start writing things down, we start taking pictures or making sounds, making voice, or it's that spirit that's attached to it. It's like when we say something to our mom, for instance, or our dad, tell them that we love them, we care about them. Then that spirit goes out of our mouth and goes into those folks' ear, and then it goes into their heart, and then pretty soon they feel love inside there. That's that spirit that goes in. The same thing happens when we say something negative, say something terrible to somebody. It goes in here, and then it goes into their body, and then it makes them feel not so good. Same thing happens when we start drawing and start writing and so on and so forth. That it's important for us to understand that there's a spirit attached to that. And if we can't communicate on paper or through words as well as we'd like to, then we need to find people that have those abilities to help us. We have to surround ourselves with great warriors, is what my dad would say. Surround your friends that are like warriors. He said they're not afraid, but you also have to be able to protect them as well. Now right here you see all these little warriors up here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of them. That represents the north, the south, east, west. And then our up above, and then below, our Mother Earth. And so this other chief that's way up here, this represents all of creation. We're outside our Creator. And so he stands alone, whereas these are all part of us. Now there's another piece right here that it shows a person with an umbrella, just the outside of it. And it's in red. And so what that really represents us as human beings is that what we want to do is we want to fill our bodies, that empty body. You see that there's nothing, no substance inside this little creation. We want to fill that substance with love, understanding, education, faith, camaraderie, friendship, all the beautiful things that give us life. We want to continue that. And it has a little umbrella. And so what that really means is sometimes we try to protect ourselves with things that have no substance, rather than to feel a substance inside of us. Being good to each other and caring for each other, that's building substance. And we're not expecting things to come back to us. We're doing it because it's the right way. And so the big blue cross represents the star, the morning star. And there's a little star, yellow star, and that's in the middle. It represents the what we call the star boy. And the star boy is a celestial being that he really admires courage and bravery and things in our stories. And so the piece itself is really about facing our fears, overcoming them, and then moving on. And so the ledger art, from the history part of it, it's really quite in depth, and it's really something I think you should really get yourself involved in and see more of the history. But for this particular project, I want you to start thinking about, how do I fit in the ideal of creating better steps for myself using ledger art, by making lists, by looking at values, but also being able to create something that I've done that's very powerful, that's very meaningful, and I can share it with everybody, and it doesn't matter what they think, but some of those people that hear my story are going to be able to say, if he can do that, then I can do that too. And pretty soon we start, all these people, these young people start making changes in their lives because we help them. And that's what we're supposed to do in our day, is be able to help each other. We all come from different nations, from some across the ocean, some that are indigenous to this land, but we're all human beings. And so the idea of ledger art is kind of a dark time in life, but like we're facing the darkness right now with the uncertainty of all the things that are going on in the world. But we also have to be able to create things that help us move ahead, because it won't be dark forever. Things will change. And so that's what ledger art is really about. I want you to be able to take your time to be able to start developing the ideal of ledger art. It's not about copying anything. It's about telling your story. Everybody has a story. And sometimes our story changes as we get older and we start getting more experience and we start doing more things in our life. Our story starts to change. The only thing that's important for us now is that we tell the universe. So I want to thank you for all your time.